Let's talk about Wild Blue Yonder. I'm not going to talk too much about it because because frankly I'm just so disappointed. And not so much in the game, but in myself. In myself for having bought essentially something that I had made a choice to sell before. In the case of Rise of the Luftwaffe, Down in Flames, which was a good game. And I had a lot of fun the few times I've played any of the Down in Flames series. And you might say, okay, so what is your problem then, dude? There are a lot. First of all, this took like a decade of development time to put out, and I'm assuming most of that effort was spent on I'm looking at a C3I ad for some reason, trying to see if it was something to cover similar to this. I'm going to spend most of the time covering kind of what's changed and whether or not it's any good, what's been added. So in all that development time, almost all of the effort was focused, I think, on the dogfight game, which in a sense is right because the dogfight game is the heart of Down in Flames. It is absolutely what the game is just about, right? And this is what made it so cool in that original Rise of the Luftwaffe game. You had a bunch of airplane cards. You had a shared deck in that case. Now we've gone to split decks, but a shared deck of maneuvers and whatnot that you could do, and it had a very reactive play style that reminds me of Attack Sub, which is also an incredibly cool little game. Both games were great little things to bring to like a coffee shop or something and, just fight out a couple of things like you would do with playing a game of Magic or whatever, in terms of just, it didn't take up a hell of a lot of space. It was fun to fly the planes a couple of times, but then there wasn't much else. And then, 8th Air Force came out with the campaigns and whatnot, which are exactly what sort of I felt the game needed, was some sort of framework construction around it. I didn't play those campaigns very much. Maybe did one or two. Always opposed. And I remember the guy who owned 8th Air Force had a lot of trouble figuring out how the campaign was supposed to actually operate. It was not easy from the rules and the materials presented. Well, oddly enough, in that decade of buffing and trying to make the game a more polished product, I think almost no effort was spent on the campaigns. They're still hard to figure out what the fuck you're supposed to do. And then when you actually play them, they sort of feel like a downgraded version of the dogfights. There's a little bit more clutter in them, a little bit more pain in the ass of doing things, but when it comes down to it, you're really just fighting out those dogfights still. Now, I didn't get to one using formations and whatnot. I was hoping to get to where I would be flying stuff like that. But in the end, it is not a great game to play solo. Right? Just like the Attack Sub, just like the original, you're trying to play a hand of cards, make judgments, make guesses as to what the other person has to respond and whatever. And sure, it can be done, but that's not the way you should play it. There's a reason I haven't covered, say, Magic the Gathering on here. Although I do have that up here. I do have all my shit up here for some reason. Don't know why. So yeah, I mean, I can have my fun soloing the dogfights, but it's not the way to really play it. And when the campaigns come down to just a mechanism to just a framework to show the soloing of the dogfights, it got old real quick, right? Like the idea of fighting out a whole bunch more dogfights, it felt too painful, especially in light of other issues that arose as I tried to look at the next campaign I was going to play. Okay. Components. Counters and whatnot, perfectly fine. Aircraft cards, peachy. Here's the problem. The game tries to cover such a large period of time and so many different planes and whatnot that there really aren't a lot of any one plane. Now you have the capability, you can photocopy planes or use substitutes or something like that to try to represent more accurate situations, because it's unlike, so I mean, usually flights were not mixed planes. Usually it would all be the same kind of plane. So if you only have like maybe 2 or 3 copies of elements, which gets to, 6 planes or whatever, because you have a pilot and a wingman card in general. You might be able to fly a reasonable sized flight, by the way the game kind of is designed, of only the most popular planes. And less popular things, yeah, you got maybe one of that, one pair. And so you really couldn't cover some of the stuff there. How big a deal is that? I don't know. I don't feel like this is a game that terribly is intending to show off the capabilities of the different planes and get all the historical elements right and everything. It's trying to do good enough, but there's so much luck in it when you start looking at the fact that you're reliant on this deck of cards to see what things you can do and whatnot, and how you're going to maneuver against each other, that I don't feel like it's trying to play in the same space that my favorite World War I airplane games tend to, where the players are taking their maneuvers into line and trying to accomplish some maneuvering advantage over the opponent. Here, it's just, I got a handful of cards. Oh, look, I got the right counter for the card that you have. Yay me. It's not like there's not strategy. There's strategy as to holding, what cards you don't want to expend, and when you want to actually bother using them and whatnot. And that's all fun stuff, but it's got a limited utility as far as I'm concerned. Like, I wouldn't want to go to a gaming session, night, whatever, and play a bunch of Down in Flames. I'd be absolutely cool doing just that at like a coffee shop or something where there's other stuff going on and that I can watch and, at least back when those things allowed you to smoke. But anyway. So that's most of the components. These decks of cards. These are problematic. GMT put their heavily armored cards, sort of their top-notch games, get these much, much stiffer, I assume more expensive cards, because they only show up in the top-notch games, that are almost impossible to shuffle without, resort. So the big advantage in a lot of games these days is these wonderful poker-style cards. Well, these aren't. These have no flexibility to them. They chip very easily, they bend more easily, and get permanent damage to them. There is no advantage to this kind of card. You're paying more for it, and it's worse. It's especially bad when you're dealing with very large decks like you have in this game. Shuffling a normal-sized deck of cards that size, sure, it would be a pain. But shuffling a this is 2 to 3 times the size of a normal deck, I think. Shuffling something of that size requires that you do a lot more shuffling and breaking decks into pieces and stuff like that. And it tires out your thumbs, it's painful to do, the cards can kind of cut your fingers. There's just nothing good about those cards. Horrible decision there.
All right. Okay.
Other components. So, the actual dogfighting rulebook, which runs 20 pages, including charts, examples, all kind of stuff like that, is relatively good. The original Down in Flames had a relatively decent rulebook. It made sense. It was easy to learn. There are a few things in here that I felt might have been included in the original. I don't remember having an issue with this, but for example, the effects of altitude. I seem to remember, I may be completely mistaken, but they certainly should have included it here. Better than breaking into 2 decks as far as I'm concerned, which some people really want. There are reasons for it, to prevent rare cards from, only showing up on one person's side or whatever, like the ace. But the one thing that I really feel like is missing, whether it was there before or not, is a little cheat sheet card that has like the altitudes, maybe a couple other little things in there. Is there anything off of here that could be on there? Sequence of play, maybe. But it could just be a normal size card that has a couple of pieces of information for the players. You only really need 2. Sure, you might be playing with like 6, 8 people at the table at the same time, but it would just be helpful to have a couple of those in the hand to pass around. They work fine. The dogfight game, like I said, it's the center of the game. It's fun to play a couple of times. Without the campaign as a structure around it, it's problematic. Which gets to the campaign rulebook. I found this a lot more painful. There's more information to be given in it. Basically, whatever kind of mission you're on, I feel like you kind of have to reference this unless you're just, totally addicted to this game and understand all the missions and kind of how the bombings work in each one and everything like that. There's little differences in a few of them, and that's okay. The actual missions, which are in the campaign, these guys, they're plausible to, they're not that painful. They don't add that much more to the dogfight situation. They give you a reason why you're dogfighting, although do you really need one? I mean, air superiority is one of the missions, and it's just a dogfight. But I feel like they add a little bit of interest to the whole thing, and they are the next step. They're the step up towards the campaigns, is doing a mission. Doing a mission just for the mission, there's not really a mechanism for saying, hey, you're bombing a port, let's do a port bombing mission, like you would do with like an SFB scenario or something. Most of these don't give you all the information that you need to conduct the mission. For example, the number of turns going in, the number of turns coming out. You can fudge all that, it's no big deal. When we get to the campaigns, what I found, and maybe I'm mistaken, maybe I missed something, but not all the information is always present on the campaign situation. The choosing of resources and whatnot, which is sort of the main mechanism of the campaign. Hey, what are you sending out of your limited supply of elements? It just feels so dull. It's funny because the thing that I most wanted in the campaign is some kind of structure around the dogfighting, right? Like, my Wings game, like my World War I games have, oh look, you collect, some sort of experience points type situation, kills whatever to reach ace, and you get better. Your pilot gets better. And it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be like a role-playing game level of complexity. Hey, if you want that, there's Dawn Patrol or whatever by TSR, which I've never played. Some people seem to really like. If something like that would be much, much easier to produce than this whole, hey, let's do, battles that are air fights that are representative of ones that happen during a certain campaign where, you got to fly a bombing mission, you got to do this, and you've got to allocate some low-level, a small number of resources, a very limited number of resources to the various battles or the various missions. And there's something kind of cute about that. It's a nice structure. It's got a lot of historical information baked into it. The land campaign wasn't that bad. And then I got to the progressive campaign, and there was information I simply couldn't find, like the distance to and from various targets in the Stalingrad airlift. The information is also not necessarily presented in the best of ways. Sometimes you have to intuit things out of charts as to what the fuck is going on in them. It's as though not much development work was done on these. I know that the campaigns were kind of clunky and hard to use in 8th Air Force, and some of them then came out in C3I magazines. I don't know where else they came out in. And they don't feel polished, and they don't feel very complete. And I'm just left with kind of there's a lot of work to do to get this framework for what's essentially a dogfight going in. Now, obviously, with the bigger bombers and whatnot, that dogfight element changes a little bit. But if anything, it just becomes more of like a luck fest, where you're just drawing cards to see what happens, rather than kind of that cool interplay and, card strategy and all that happened with the base dogfight game. The base dogfight game has a certain flavor. The elements that support the campaign, the mission runs themselves, a lot of them are just, hey, draw a card, see if the flak hits you. Draw a card, see, if the target has defense against you. With bombers, same kind of thing. And many of the attacks are going to be just your wingman going in and taking a shot. And then you get to do one with your hand as well. But which keeps some of that weird card play element. Wingman also always feels kind of weird. Like, even in the original, even in just the dogfight version of the game, the wingman's sort of like this magical power you have, right? Like, you're here managing your hand and trying to do certain things, and then your wingman just kind of comes in, grabs a couple of cards, figures out, can I do anything at all? And again, it's just sort of this luck fest that could, it could demolish your target's hand, or it could have no effect whatsoever. And it's just like, wow, that's neat. But it kind of fit in that sort of light flavor of the game. But as you added the campaigns, especially where you're tracking, all this information, weather, and all kind of other stuff, and I don't mind that being there. I don't mind it being there, but it's not polished enough to be easy to access. For example, if I was going to do the Stalingrad airlift, as far as I could tell, I would have had to make up, well, here we go. No. Yep, here we go. It's over on the campaign log. Place I did not look. It has the distance for the missions on it. That's the thing I couldn't find. Because it's placed in multiple places. Or it could be in multiple places. It could be in the campaign rules themselves. The campaign has its own rules for where, I happened to look at that, right? It could be in the campaign rules for general campaigns. It could be there under progressive campaigns, which this was. It could be on here, where it turns out it was, the place I didn't bother looking. Because I didn't expect this to be rules, right? This is something you write on, right? Or it could be on the campaign card itself. Well, I looked quite extensively. Why didn't I notice it on here? I don't know. Hard to tell. Oh, did I even have that one out? I'm looking through the papers that I have. They give you so much fucking stuff. Yeah, I think I had the Stalingrad up face up. I don't know. But, yeah. This has the information, but because I did a photocopy of it, the printing in that area is a little blurred and iffy. You know, giving myself an excuse. But yeah, it just feels like the effort to give the information in a clear and simple format just wasn't present. So like conducting missions is here on this one where it tells you what the distance is. Well, the distance on other ones is different on different campaigns. So like some of them have it on here. If we take a look at one. Certainly the land campaigns had the information directly on the campaign card. So like where you'd expect something to be, it might be, but it might not. And that was enough to foil me and get me to the point of, yep, can't do this. I'm just not willing to. Now, a big part of that is the campaign is just, you know, I'm playing out these stupid little dogfights. I call them that, but that's how they, you know, how they kind of feel, even though I enjoy them. I'm playing out these little dogfights, but I'm going through so much effort to get, it's just a more burdensome version of the dogfight each time when it comes down to it. So yeah, I feel like this was not developed as well as it should be. Now, I'm glad I found that the information is there, because I was really furious to think that it's not there. What can I say about the campaigns? Not much without having played one, right? Like, I mean, I played a land campaign, and what was the sort of economy of force I have there? If I didn't screw it up, I've got 3 missions, and I've got 3 resources in each mission, and most of the resources are pretty much the same. You know? Some of them might not help me at all, depending on what the random mission selection is. For the Stalingrad airlift, what was kind of appealing to me about these progressive missions was that I have an actual pool of planes that I can use. And I can use X number every week, no more than X on any given mission. And as I lose planes, they start getting marked off, and they get taken off my roster. I also have resources which, again, had trouble finding some place that told me where my resources come from. Maybe it's actually on that damn chart, on that same thing that I was looking at, that, you know, is not where I expected rules to be. Let's take another look. Stalingrad airlift. Does it tell me something about resources? For each mission, players may choose one resource and assign the number of aircraft. No, it doesn't really tell you about this. So, the progressive campaigns come with a fixed number of resources listed on them. The only place it talks about marking off resources is in the land campaign rules, which has got nothing to do with this, I would think. And I went off on a little rant about that. So, I mean, after finding that, I was not that surprised to not be able to find rules at all that gave me the distances. I was disturbed, and very much of the opinion that absolutely, like, they basically just reprinted campaigns that had known problems in them without trying to fix them. I don't think that's the case. I think there aren't known I think the problem there, other than me, is that the presentation of the information for the campaign is not well and easily expressed, and not always where you want it. Now, there is actually nowhere that I could find that had the rules for what your resource limitations are over the course of a progressive campaign. But like from charts that I could intuit some stuff from, I can intuit some stuff there from the land campaign rules and assume that it works the same way, that I have X number of resources no matter how long the progressive campaign exists, which is not how the land campaigns work, but it's, if you applied the rules from the land campaigns to this, is how it would work out. Anyway, I think my bigger disappointment, though, is in myself, not with the game. Not in terms of having fucked stuff up and not been able to find stuff in a hard to navigate presentation, but rather, because we're used to me not finding stuff, rather that I bought this thing knowing what it was more or less. Now, I had hopes for that little, hey, I'll have certain pilots and they'll improve as they go. And I could make up rules for that fairly easily. It wouldn't be that hard. Mike Lee did now I'm confused. Mike Lamb did this. I don't know why I keep confusing it. But anyway, he did this in the campaign that he ran at the cons. And now I'm going to make sure. Yeah, Mike Lamb. And very, very simple. Not as complex as what I would like, because there are different kind of pilots and whatnot, but the way I would do it with the pilots is, oh, hey, you just improved. I'll draw a random pilot of your nationality and give it to you. Which would also work. The net effect of those little advantages, they're cool. They're not that big a deal. And they get generated just randomly on a per mission basis. So if I'm out flying a mission, I roll up on a table to see, or basically draw random cards to see, hey, what did I get? And they don't change the balancing in terms of the points. So somebody could just get very, very lucky on those draws, or very lucky on the bombing run, or whatever. And that's all that comes out of it. Yeah, you could get lucky on your die rolls in a game of some more traditional hex and counter games. So who cares, right? Luck is luck. Well, okay, but some of those can be a big deal. But again, the pilots aren't that huge in terms of the advantage that they add. It's not like the maneuver capabilities that come to you when playing, say, Blue Max or something. Now, the disappointment that I have is more, I knew this is a game that I gave up, that I sold. Stupid inserts. That I sold to a buddy. Wouldn't have done it if he didn't really, really want it for cost, in terms of the original Down in Flames. And he really wanted my copy because you could no longer get the original. Like, he bought 8th Air Force expecting to be able to find the original, and then he wasn't able to get it. It was out of print already by the time he bought his 8th Air Force. So there were a lot of reasons for me to be willing to give it up. But one of the big ones was I play most of my games solo. I didn't really see much opportunity for me to play that card game, fun as it is, with a lot of other people. Yeah, my wife at the time and I could have played it. Sure. She enjoyed, but there wasn't much more to it, right? There wasn't a campaign framework in the original. And the campaign framework that is here and is in all the series is, I find at this point at least, less than I desired. You know, it doesn't include the big thing that I wanted. I wanted the capability for. I like the capability of managing the resources to send on each mission, but it doesn't even really feel like I'm doing that, right? Like, even with the progressive campaign, I get the feeling of, yeah, I've got a limited number of planes, but and certain specific resources and what. Maybe I'd like that better. The land campaign definitely didn't give it. So again, I wish I had gotten to the progressive campaign. Had I noticed that first night, I would have done it. Make a game too hard to be able to see what the fuck's going on in it, and I really feel like the presentation of the campaigns is kind of slipshod, and it's very disturbing. And then I'll tell you, there was definitely a factor of, I don't want to fucking shuffle these over rigid decks the amount of times that I'm going to for another campaign. I just don't want to do it, you know. That actually is probably the biggest thing that I dislike about the game is the fucking armored cards. I wish GMT would just fucking stop with them. They are absolutely of no use. They add no value. They're worse to play with, easier to damage, and the only person who sees no disadvantage from them is the person who puts their cards in sleeves all the time anyway. That's my feeling on it. But yeah, it was just disappointing to me because I knew that I wasn't going to get a lot of playtime out of this. But also, another factor, the huge box. This is a game that the little old-style GMT box that it came in, which, you know, was like a third the size of this, right, was still too big. Because like games like Dixie, the little Civil War card game, and Face-to-Face and Antietam and whatever, that are also perfect games to carry and bring, you know, to a coffee shop, or we used to do them at a breakfast joint as well. Like a deck of cards that you could just drop in your pocket, like a magic deck or whatever. Things that are fairly small and that you don't have to throw in a backpack to carry have a huge advantage for going out and just, you know, a small amount of table space type of pastime to enjoy, you know, while you're out or whatever. This definitely failed at that. I mean, this is like Monster Game Box as far as GMT is concerned. This is what you get, you know, your biggest games in. And yeah, it's overkill in a lot of ways for what the game is. And I feel like in a lot of ways the campaigns are overkill as well. They're just too much effort without really adding a hell of a lot to what sort of the heart of the game was. And when all that comes out and I say all that, yeah, I wish I had kept my original. Because that actually, with its smaller box, not small enough to drop in a pocket, but smaller, suited my needs and my desires more. Sure, I would always be thinking, oh, I wish I could make a campaign for this. Ooh, that would be cool. Yeah, well, the campaign part of it doesn't add enough. Anyway, that's my feelings. my somewhat uninformed feelings because I didn't get through the campaign.